Hello, my name is Max Martins, and today I will be talking about the principles of restorative justice for CIA 420, restorative justice. Restorative justice is an alternative to traditional punishment. It takes a number of forms, including family group conferencing, sentencing circles, and victim impact panels. In Canada, restorative justice draws upon values that originated from Indigenous traditions, focused on repairing harm and coming to a collective conclusion that is in the best interest for all involved. These methods adhere to certain key principles. The first principle we'll talk about is that restorative justice is voluntary. One of the main goals of restorative justice is to allow the offender to take full responsibility for their actions. This includes acknowledging that what they did was wrong, understanding the harm they caused, and hearing the perspective of the victim, and displaying remorse. This gives offenders the chance to look inward and fully grasp the repercussions of their crime. Without accountability, it is impossible for restorative justice to be effective and may result in additional victimization. For this reason, restorative justice is utilized in cases where the offender shows remorse and agrees to take an active role in the process. Restorative justice requires both the offender and the victim to be willing participants. And if the offender does not take accountability, how can they participate effectively? Another principle is the alleviation of harm. From the restorative justice perspective, harm is complex and materializes in a number of ways. The most obvious form of harm is harm done to the victim. This can include physical, psychological, and emotional harm. Another kind of harm is social harm. After victimization, a person may experience strained relationships, disconnection, and a feeling of isolation. This is often overlooked in traditional court settings. However, it is just as profound to the victim. Restorative practices allow the victim to contextualize their suffering to the offender more effectively. Secondly, restorative justice addresses harm done to the community. Crimes can impact the sense of community safety, relationships between community members, and family well-being, among many other examples. For these reasons, restorative justice aims to involve the community in the process. Part of this is recognizing secondary victims. These can include family members, friends, and loved ones of both the victim and offender. Crimes can have a lasting impact on individuals who share close relationships with those involved. For the victim, this can mean parents bearing the financial impact of caring for their severely injured child. For the offender, this might look like a partner having to come to terms with the fact that their loved one committed a serious crime and their life being disrupted because of this. There are countless ways in which criminal cases impact far more than simply the immediate victims. Restorative justice looks out for the people who may otherwise be given no voice in these matters. Lastly, restorative justice addresses harm on the part of the offender, recognizing that there are underlying reasons for their actions, which may stem from harm experienced in their lives. Instead of simply casting judgment, restorative justice offers compassion to the offender in an effort to inspire change in their life. A nationwide study in the United States compared traditional criminal justice with restorative justice and found that victim satisfaction was 79% in restorative justice compared to 57% for traditional justice. Fear of re-victimization for victims was only 10% compared to 23% for traditional justice. Recidivism was only 18% compared to 27%. These stats show that restorative justice has clear benefits for both victim and offender. Another principle is empowerment of the victim. In the traditional justice system, victims are left out of proceedings and decision-making and are not given the chance to fully express themselves. A Canadian study found that 24% of victims were very interested in a face-to-face mediation with the offender. Another study, this one out of Britain, examined the reasons why victims would want the face-to-face meeting. These included wanting to ask why they did what they did, to communicate the effect that the crimes had on them, and to tell the offender how they feel about them. Clearly, a sizable percentage of victims have the desire to meet those who victimize them for different reasons. Restorative justice provides the flexibility to facilitate these kinds of meetings, something that is left out in the adversarial structure. An important feature of restorative justice is that it can be tailored to the uniqueness of each case. In formal court proceedings, there is not much consideration given to specific circumstances of those involved. Many crimes are committed by people who they themselves have been victims in the past. Restorative justice addresses the needs of the offender in order to remedy the underlying reasons behind why they committed crimes, which should in turn prevent recidivism. Victims are able to choose the restorative justice method that best suits their needs as well. Different programs involve varying degrees of confrontation. For example, if they are comfortable, a victim could opt for a mediation where they would be face to face with the offender. On the other hand, however, a victim impact panel would not require the victim to be in close proximity to the offender. This allows for the victim to be in control. The last and perhaps most important key principle is rehabilitation of the offender. The end goal of restorative justice is to increase the likelihood of successful reintegration back into society. As recidivism rates show, traditional justice is not a very effective deterrent of crime. A Stats Canada report studied 70,000 adults, some of whom received community sentences, while the others received full custody. 30% of those released from custody reoffended within 3 months, compared to 14% for those who served community sentences. That's more than a 50% reduction. In Canada, even those who commit serious violent offenses will more than likely be released at some point. We cannot rely on our traditional justice system to ensure that these people will not reoffend, and as we have seen, this only increases the likelihood. The Association for Reformed Political Action Canada sums up nicely the rationale behind restorative justice. Crimes cannot be excused and must be dealt with in some way. However, punishment itself does not provide forgiveness and peace. Restorative justice does not make punishment any less of a priority, rather it assigns importance to restoration, finding a healthy balance between punishment and healing. This is a very good point and is one of the reasons why I personally agree with restorative justice. I believe that the numbers say a whole lot about whether or not restorative justice is effective. As has been shown, victims and offenders have higher satisfaction with restorative justice than traditional justice. If we can provide offenders and victims with an alternative that yields more positive results for both parties, then there is no reason not to implement restorative justice. One could say that restorative justice is too lenient and may result in a punishment less than what the offender deserves. This would require one to define the guidelines for what a person may or may not deserve in any given circumstance, a determination that could only be made by God. If anyone has the strongest or most clear feelings about what an offender deserves, it would be their victim. However, victims tend to be in favor of restorative justice, meaning that they might be open to a more lenient punishment. Why then should we skip over the healing process that restorative justice provides, simply because the result may not be traditionally punitive? Questioning our long-standing ideas of what justice is supposed to look like and adopting a more humanistic approach is an important step in ensuring that justice stays just. In many restorative justice cases, simply locking the offender away would have had a far more negative effect on both parties. However, this is the path that the majority of cases take. This is not to say that there is no place for traditional justice. The alternative, however, should be readily available in those cases where it is a viable option. Thank you.